The 1940s comes along, and so does World War II. That's when the draft happens. America just needed all the young men that they could get. So John gets drafted. When you get drafted, you have to take a general classification test. So when it came to John, he had scored so high on his test that the military was like, all right, we're actually gonna put you through medical school and you're gonna do that. So John ends up breezing right through medical school, and he ends up graduating from the Utah School of Medicine in 1947. In 1967, at this point, it had been about 20 years since John had been a doctor. Things are going great for him. He's doing well. But things change. His cage gets rattled a bit. During one of his procedures, he was removing someone's thyroid. When he was performing the surgery on the table, the patient almost dies. And after this, he realized that he needed and wanted to go back to school so he could further train as a surgeon. So he ends up going off to school. He goes to the New York Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. Great, to become a surgeon. He's a very, very intelligent man. And John would even tell people that he never opened a book like once to study, and that he had a photographic memory and school was like nothing to him. During closing exams, there's two parts. There's the written part, right? And that part, no problem, he got it. But I guess there was a second part to the test that he was really not ready for. And that was the oral exams. Oh yeah. He completely choked on the orals. When people ask John, like, how did you fail the oral part of it? That's usually maybe the easiest part of the exam. John's reason was that he had a very domineering father, and that's why he was really intimidated when doing the oral part of it. John said that whenever he was face to face with authority figures, he would just clam up, shut down, and forget everything that like he ever knew. So even though he did nail the exam, he still failed the second part. Therefore, he was not certified to practice surgery. But John decided to take his life back and say F it to the man. He was just going to perform operations without a license. He was like, dude, I'm smart enough. I'm smart. I could do it. So John decides to pick a specialty, and his specialty would be gender reassignment surgeries. Very specific, and at this time, in 74, not really big discussion, right? Not really a mainstream thing. But what he did know was that there was a black market for him to move into and work in. And in the black market, you can probably get away with not having a degree, certificate, whatever. Nobody is going to check. He would be offering his patients a very steep discount, okay? At one point, he was like charging people $2,500 for a gender reassignment surgery versus $10,000 to $20,000 that other doctors would be charging at that time. Some of John's experiments were actually quite successful. Like, for example, John had developed a technique where he would cut enough of a away to make it similar to a so his patients, they could feel pleasure and also have an which is major. It was said by many within the trans community, they referred to him as like a savior of some sorts or their knight in shining armor. Because no doctors were offering this type of procedure, especially for people who couldn't afford the $10,000 to $20,000. $2,500 is affordable. He was helping people. You know, a lot of doctors and whatnot are talking about this, having to do all of these revisions, redos, essentially. And all this would catch up to John. California ends up finding John and revokes his medical license for gross negligence and practicing unprofessional medicine in a manner which involved moral turpitude. So John packs up and he heads out to the Caribbean, where he would pick up the same old tricks. Just whatever the people wanted, he was like, yeah, I'll do it. I guess he really enjoyed his time there, though, because he would stay there for quite some time and do his thing out there. And it would be in the Caribbean where John would meet his third wife, Julie. She was only 17 years old when she met John. John was at the ripe age of 59. Julie and John would go on to have 2 kids of their own, which brings John's total to 10 children. And he wasn't showing up for any of them. Okay. But just like before, things would eventually catch up to John, and he would end up losing permission to practice in St. Lucia. Now, this time he goes to the San Diego area. Now, the reason he goes to San Diego is because where he ends up moving was really close to the border to Mexico. So he wanted to open up his own practice in Tijuana, Mexico. So he did just that. He got like this place and he could drive to work because the border was right there. Like it just was great for him. And John claimed that as they always do, John was like, I talked to God and God told me that I was meant to do gender reassignment surgery for God's children, the trans community. There were several patients who came to John for the gender reassignment surgery. So when wanting gender reassignment male to female is a big part of just that. So it all sounded great, but the results that a lot of people got were very different. On some patients, John would remove but in return wouldn't give them. There were some patients who ended up with nothing down below. John actually ends up getting arrested, right? Bravo. Yay. Finally, he's arrested. And he only ends up spending 19 months in prison for practicing without a medical license. So let's jump to the year 1998. That's where we meet a man named Greg Firth. He desperately wanted his healthy leg removed. This is considered a very rare psychological disorder called aptonomophilia. It's a real disorder. I was like, huh? Could you imagine how horrible? Oh my God. So he travels down to go see John. And he asks, John, will you do this amputation for me? Explains the whole situation. It sounded like John didn't really even ask questions. He was just kind of like, all right, sure. He agrees. They're going to do it. Greg heads in for surgery, but something out of a movie, because Greg said that at the very last minute, he was laying down and he's looking around the room and he was like noticing how unclean everything was. So Greg gets that feeling in his gut. He tells Dr. John, like, okay, just stop. I have to stop. I don't think I could do this. He tells him that he doesn't feel comfortable with going through with this and decides to just back out, like right at the last minute. Woo. So Greg totally backs out of the situation, which good for him. But unfortunately, Greg says that he actually felt bad for bailing on John's surgery. So he tells John, like, I actually have a friend who suffers from the same disorder, and I'll recommend him to you. I'll recommend you to him. Thank you. So Greg contacts his friend, and this friend is a 79-year-old man. He's suffering from the same condition, and his name is Philip Bondi. And again, Philip too had suffered from the same thing as Greg and wanted his leg removed. So this sounds great to Philip. Philip's like, dude, I am 79 years old. I am ready to have this leg removed. Okay, it's been here for far too long. May 9th, 1998, Philip goes in for surgery. Now, surgery goes well. Leg is removed. And it was said Philip was quite happy with the results. Philip did have one complaint, and that complaint was that towards the end of the procedure, he said the medication wore off, and he woke up and he could feel his leg being sawed off. He was unsure what to do with the amputated leg. I'm not sure what doctors do with amputated legs either. John didn't know what to do, so he's like, okay, I know what to do. He drives out to the middle of nowhere, just as far as he can go. John takes the amputated leg, throws it out of the car window, and just hopes that the animals will take care of it. And that's where the leg went. So since this procedure was very, very illegal, Dr. John made sure, or at least he tried to make sure and cover his tracks. Like, did he though? He threw a leg out the window. After the procedure with Philip was done, Dr. John puts Philip in a hotel in San Diego at the Holiday Inn and drops him off, left him alone in a room, no aftercare or anything. And Philip just like really tried his best to power through the healing process. One of the hotel staff members noticed that Philip seemed to be in a lot of pain. Anyways, this person offered to call the paramedics, and Philip kept saying like, no, don't call anybody. I'm fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. So Philip ends up talking to his friend Greg, the one who recommended him for the surgery, you know. So he talks to Greg on the phone, is telling him what's going on, telling him that he's alone and in a lot of pain. Greg decides to fly out, and he ends up checking into like a connecting hotel room so he could be there, take care of his friend, and nurse him, you know, during the healing process, since there was literally no aftercare. The next morning, Greg comes into the hotel room to bring Philip breakfast and, you know, check on him. And that's when he discovers his friend was dead. Now, not just like dead in his sleep. Greg called it a quote unquote chaotic scene. Now, according to Greg, the scene was intense. He said that Philip was laying half on the bed and half off of the bed. He had oozing from what looked like his blackened stump. Well, someone ends up calling the cops. So Greg tells the police officers that Philip actually lost his leg in a recent car accident that happened in Mexico, and he was in the hotel trying to recover from this car accident. So instantly they knew something ain't right. You're lying, Greg. Lie out. So police are kind of like looking around the room for any clues or anything. And luckily they come across a big clue. They find 2 different receipts. Now there's nothing better than receipts. So one of them was for $5,000. It was a receipt, $5,000. And on it said surgery. That's it. And they also find another receipt for $5,000. But on this one, it just said hospitalization. So obviously this is going to bring further questions, but lucky for the police officers and detectives, right at the bottom of the receipt was the name Dr. John Ronald Brown. So detectives show up at the apartment where John is staying at. He initially avoided saying that he had actually amputated Philip's leg, but he did acknowledge that he had driven Philip to the clinic, and then he visited him at the Holiday Inn the following day to like look over the wound. And he told officers that when he went to the Holiday Inn, he noticed that there was like some minor red marks, and also the stump had a pale blue tint to it. Police were actually searching John's apartment, and boy, the mess they saw. Now this was like gross, real gross. A bunch of videotapes. Nothing good is on a videotape. John, you see what he did? He had his medical assistants record some of his procedures, and he was going to use this as like a before and after, as promo video. Like, here's what they look like before and then here's after. And that was really the jackpot because it showed the detectives everything. So John's arrested. Great. They had solid evidence. I mean, they had a bunch of victim testimonies from over the decades John had been practicing, and they also had videotapes of his illegal surgeries. Some were just straight up disgusting. The judge had to watch the videotapes because they're the judge and they have to see the evidence. And it was said that the judge actually was so grossed out by the tapes that they had asked for them to be turned off. The game was finally over for Dr. John Ronald Brown. He was convicted of 1 count of second-degree murder, as well as an additional 7 counts of unlawful practice of medicine. John was sentenced to 15 years to life. Now, mind you, he's 75 years old at this time, so it's basically a life sentence, but let's just imagine in a crazy world that he's only like 30. 15 years to life? I don't know. Did they ever find the leg? I don't know. It's fine because it's essentially a life sentence. John did appeal numerous times, but he never got out of prison. He was there for at least 12 years, and then he would end up dying of pneumonia at the age of 88. Anyways, John should have been taken down a long time ago. Unfortunately, that just did not happen. And that is that. I will be seeing you guys very soon. Have a good day. I said that. Okay, bye. Thank you.